Hello, my most holy of disciples. Welcome to the Celestial Perch. Today I have a new video. This is the second installment of the Shroud Covenant reviews. Today we'll be looking at the Eater of Worlds. As opposed to my first installment, which went over a lot more in depth of how the Covenants actually work themselves, this time I plan to just exclusively look at the Eater of Worlds, and if you're curious about how you can join your covenant, and a lot more on what you can do to choose a specific covenant, or at least weigh yourself more towards a specific covenant, I will link the first video in the series here in the description, and you can go ahead and look there. But for starters, we're just going to look over all of the bonuses, just kind of read them out so you can see them right here, and then after that we will dive into each one. And when we dive into each individual bonus, I will kind of give a brief review or my personal opinion on it. Don't take it as gospel, it's just my personal opinion. As the meta evolves within single player and multiplayer, the covenants could change depending on your playstyle or the meta you're playing in. So keep that in mind, that not everything I say here will reign true for maybe your personal preference or your multiplayer meta. But we can jump into it and look at the overall bonuses now. Now, looking at the bonuses overall for the Eater of Worlds, we can see that it is primarily focused on domination and military. It has a heavy focus on ship fire rate, naval capacity, as well as some extra army damage. The primary downside being that we have army and ship upkeep increased by a significant amount if we're not at war. So our starting bonus will give us 25% army damage and 7% fire rate. And after we fully confirm our covenant, we will get the 100% army upkeep and ship upkeep if we're not at war. Now our 20 favor bonus will come in, and we will get 12 naval capacity per telepath job, and we will be able to construct the Sanctum of the Eater building, as shown here on the screen. Once we hit 50 favor, we will replace our starting bonus. You'll notice that all of these bonuses are just simply doubled. So we go from 25 to 50 and from 7 to 15. So a sizable increase there, as well as a sizable increase in the army and ship upkeep, from 100% to 200% if we're not at war. Our 90 favor bonus, we will be allowed to choose a psychic leader and give them the Chosen of the Eater trait, which I will show up here on the screen. And for a 150 favor bonus, our final bonus, we will get the Mark of the Eater technology, a utility slot that we can put on our ships, and it will be here on the screen. Now, the starting bonus for the Eater of Worlds being 25% extra army damage and 7% fire rate at the cost of 100% army upkeep and 100% ship upkeep is relatively minor. Considering you're more than likely to get the Eater of Worlds if you're already militarist or fanatic militarist, the bonuses provided simply from taking those ethics would be more than the Eater of Worlds. Now, it's always better to have more ship fire rate than your opponent, but had this have been a fire rate and weapon damage bonus, it would have been a little bit more appealing, considering the hefty downside. As if you plan on having some ships in the early game and focusing on expansion, if you have one neighbor that you can readily declare war on, if you declare war, win, or lose, then you will be at peace regardless for 10 years with them. Now, if you have no other neighbors that you can readily attack, you could always attempt to declare war on someone very, very far away and just remain at war with them to keep the upkeep down. Of course, you could also just take the Eater of Worlds and focus on star-based technologies and have very few ships in the early game anyways, picking up some defensive packs, and not really caring too much about the downside there. There is one thing to keep in mind though, as for every covenant, we'll just go over this now, there is another hidden downside that is accompanying your bonus downside. So for the Eater of Worlds, I will put it on the screen here, but it is a bit rough, as you can lose psychic leaders, you can lose pops, you can have blockers put on your planets, and you can also have some of your uninhabited worlds shrouded, which means you will not be able to colonize them, and can be a detriment if this happens to you in the early game when you're trying to expand. Now, although you can mitigate the ship and army upkeep through several ways. The other downside to the Eater of Worlds is a lot harder to mitigate, as it is random, and the percent chance, you can at least know which one you're more likely to get, but still losing pops, gaining blockers, losing possibly habitable worlds, all of those can be quite detrimental, so it definitely feels a lot more punishing than some of the other Covenants just at a first glance. I will have to continue to play through my current playthrough, which I actually chose the Eater of Worlds, to see how it would go, and so far it's been okay, but we'll see how it pans out. And every 15 years, you can have one of these random downsides occur. But for now, we can go ahead and look at the 20 favor bonus. Now, looking at the 20 favor bonus, we can see here that we get 12 naval capacity per telepath job. Comparing this to an anchorage that has a naval logistics office, each anchorage will give us +6 naval cap. So each of our telepath jobs is now roughly equivalent to 2 anchorages with a naval logistics building attached to it. So in the early to mid game, this can net you a significant amount of naval capacity and allow you to run additional ships without hitting that higher maintenance, which can be quite important, as you know, the upkeep for ships can be increased by quite a bit when taking the Eater of Worlds if you do not happen to be at war. We can also construct the Sanctum of the Eater building. This building, it will take 600 days, 600 minerals. It has a 75 base cost of exotic gases, and will take 8 energy and 2 exotic gases to maintain. Now, it does have some pretty powerful bonuses though. Empire-wide, we get 10% weapons range, minus 10% ship upkeep, and 3 telepath jobs. Now, as we saw before, these telepath jobs will be providing us 12 naval capacity each. So on our base, generally speaking, we would build this on our capital. So on our capital, with the Sanctum of the Eater building, in addition to the other psionic building, which will provide us 5 total telepath jobs, meaning that on our capital we will get 60 naval capacity, as well as 50% extra bonus resources from jobs from our psionic pops, and a reduction of crime, as well as a large benefit to our Unity production. So the Sanctum of the Eater building, and just all the other buildings for the Covenants, very, very powerful. The weapons range will just help our ships engage a bit better, and the ship upkeep means that we can negate the downside ever so slightly, but more importantly, when we're at war, we can field more ships, as our ships will cost a bit less. So now we can move into the 50 favor bonus. So moving on, we now have our 50 favor bonus to go over. This will replace our starting bonus, so going from 7% fire rate to 15% fire rate and 25% army damage to 50%. Also, the negatives will double, go from 100 to 200%. There's really not too much to say here, just that we get a slightly better than regular militarist bonus, while still being a little bit worse than the fanatic variant of militarist. The army damage could factor in. You might have to build fewer armies, but really you're just looking at a small fire rate increase, and all in all, relatively mediocre. So moving on to our 90 favor bonus. Here we get to select a leader to be the chosen of the Eater. So this, like all Covenants, we get to choose 4 of the leader types and select them to receive specific benefits. For the Eater of Worlds, we do not have access to scientists, so we do not get a bonus to them. All of these leaders are functionally immortal, so barring any kind of like accident, event, or combat disaster, they cannot die. Starting with the ruler, we get plus 15% ship build speed and minus 10% ship upkeep. Overall, pretty solid. The benefits to ship build speed and ship upkeep just mean that we can get a slight edge on our opponent, field a few more ships than them with the reduced ship upkeep, and just get them out a bit quicker during the wars. Our governor will increase the ship build speed by 25%, a larger bonus there, and reduces the ship build cost. The ship build cost can actually be quite impactful in the mid game, where you're trying to field large amounts of battleships and cruisers. So throwing this governor in a sector where you're going to be using your mega shipyard or just your regular shipyards can save you a significant amount of alloys. And the last one to consider would be our admiral, giving us 40% weapons damage and plus 10 chance to hit. That's a very solid bonus. The weapons damage pairs quite nicely with the playstyle of the Eater of Worlds, as we're going to have a lot of ship fire rate. So getting 40% weapon damage on top of that can make for a very, very powerful fleet. And the plus 10 chance to hit will allow you to negate a lot of your opponent's evasion. And shown here on the screen is the chance to hit equation. So getting plus 10 to that is extremely powerful, and you can stack that with some other modifiers to really make sure all of your weapons are doing their max damage. And considering you're having 40% extra weapons damage on top of that, between the three, with the playstyle of Eater of Worlds, I would either probably take the governor or maybe the admiral. I'm kind of leaving out the general here, as the general isn't really ever going to be useful, and I wouldn't really ever recommend taking the general. But for this, I would say all of these are pretty flexible picks and all pretty powerful. The Chosen of the Eater is probably one of the better bonuses that the Eater of Worlds gets, so definitely tailor this to your situation. And moving on to our last bonus, which is the Mark of the Eater. This will give us a utility slot that we can put on our ships. It gives us a plus 5 chance to hit, as well as 25% orbital bombardment damage. Now, considering that there is already a plus 5 chance to hit utility slot, effectively all we're getting here is some extra bombardment damage. I don't really know if it is worthy of 150 favor bonus. The Mark of the text so far, or Mark of the Covenant text so far, have been kind of meh, and the Eater of the Worlds being the military focused one, I was hoping for maybe something a bit more interesting. Regrettably, just some extra orbital bombardment damage. It really won't affect your gameplay too much. In the early to mid game, you're probably either going to be taking over planets or stealing pops, so can help there slightly, maybe taking down some armies to let you land a bit earlier in the mid game. And the late game, most of the time you're either going to be completely taking over planets just with extremely powerful armies and cracking planets, or just outright vassalizing people. So the effectiveness of this really isn't up to par for what I would say would be 150 favorite bonus. But those are all the bonuses looked at in relative depth, and now we can just kind of move on to what I think of the Eater of the Worlds overall and what I recommend taking it. So looking at the Eater of the Worlds overall, I would say I'm relatively lukewarm on the Eater of the Worlds. It feels to me to be one of the worst covenants that you could choose, as the downsides can be extreme if you're not able to mitigate them, and the random downsides can just be a bit much for the relatively minor benefits you're getting, especially in the early game, as empires that will either random into the Eater of Worlds or will take it on purpose will probably already have a lot of ship fire rate bonus, seeing that you're most likely going to be militarist. You might have stuff like Distinguished Admiralty. You'll probably be going down the Supremacy tree, so you're going to have some ship fire rate bonuses anyways. So getting an additional 15% and taking this covenant might not really be worth it. The largest benefit that the Eater of Worlds has is a very powerful admiral, as well as a pretty solid building. The empire-wide benefit here is good. It's going to help you throughout the game, and the extra naval capacity from Telepath jobs can come in at a point where it will help you field a lot of extra fleets. It just might not translate as well into the late game, where you should be able to field a large enough economy and build enough anchorages with naval logistics offices to really manage your fleet size anyways. And even if you go over it, your economy will be well strong enough to support any number of fleets that you need to deal with either the crisis or your neighbors. So I think comparing it to the other covenants, it's lacking, but it still could have some fringe use. If you're going for more of like a extreme rush build and you're going fanatic militarist, you could take Eater of Worlds, stack on a lot of fire rate bonuses, get the Admiral with the ship weapons damage, and just really try to take proactive engagements and beat your opponent's fleets with a very, very powerful Admiral. And one last thing to cover that's kind of a cool benefit is that you can stack the Chosen of the Eater and the Chosen One benefit. So as shown here, you can get both benefits on a singular Admiral, and putting that on top of other bonuses that you might get, like Engineer or Warlike or Gale Speed, you can have an extremely powerful Admiral, especially if you're able to get him up to a high level. If you give this guy an effective fleet with good ship designs, you will be nigh unstoppable unless you push him into, bad situations. But if you take good engagements, the Eater of the Worlds does have some potential. It just feels a little bit weaker than some of the others. But that's my overall just kind of overview and slight review of the Eater of Worlds. We still have 2 more to go, and then once I complete that, we'll give kind of a really brief, maybe 5-minute video where we compare all 4, rate them, and rate them against each other. But thank you for listening, and please like and subscribe. I always try to leave this to the end of the video so that I don't, just kind of throw it in the middle. But if you like the content, just also press the little bell notification to see when I post videos. But thank you, and have a blessed day.